Officially again, somebody just came in as well. Hello, Toronto. Hello, Berlin. Hello, Detroit, for that matter. My name is Jutta Brennebühl. Most of you know me. I'm the program curator here at the Goethe-Institut. And welcome to, our Goethe Space and this particular photography exhibition, Foreground by Zun Lee for the Contact Photography Festival this month. And over the next hour, these 1, 2, 3, 4 artists, writers, curators, all with one leg in Germany, at least one leg, I don't know, 2 legs, 2 arms, but also connected to here and North America. We'll talk about what it means to move through the world as Black, othered, or as Zun so beautifully calls it, wayward bodies. We're being framed by this exhibition of images by Zun Lee, exhibited for the first time. Thank you so much. Many taken in Toronto, and spaces you recognize. Yeah, Deb is nodding. This is the Dufferin bus, one of the first images I saw, and I was like, that's my bus. Some images, especially the digital ones here, taken in the US, a few in Germany. And if you were here for the opening, you'll notice that this project in the making, as we like to call it, has evolved over the past few weeks. Local artists, I'll name them, Complex, Sarah Espedito, Amaba Weil, and Isi Bakuman, have just added works that explore and expand Zun's leitmotif of loitering as public space reclamation. And we hope you'll get to spend some time with all of these images. Now, we largely, in this particular group, decided to introduce ourselves in a way via one of Zun's photos. So I'll just point to my choice before I make a few biographical notes on the 4 panelists you already see on the screen, and then hand the conversation over to them really quickly. So I could have chosen, dozens, and it really was a hard choice because in curating this over a year, I have looked at hundreds of your photos, Zun. And I really labored over the digital choice because the more choice you have, the harder it gets to sort of then go like, okay, no, that one has to stay out. But my choice from this collage that we put together that reflects the 5 of us is this group of young men. And I chose that mostly because, from what I understand, Zun, right, they're hanging there, they got their Trini t-shirts on, they're waiting for Caravana, the Toronto Caribbean Carnival to start. And I like that for starters. I like that waiting. I like that limbo. I like that it's a group of young Black men. So good looking young men, I should say. So the opposite of me, which is always attractive, right? If you have an access point to another community, a community that you're not part of. Also, a lot of the images, as you can see, not all of them, but many are solo pieces, solo portraits, or really tender duets in a way, father and son or lovers. But this is a group, and I like to stand here and wonder what connects them, what they're waiting for, what their expectations are. But we'll get to the other images as we go around, and it's my pleasure to introduce. I'll start with Karina, who you see on our far right here, based in Berlin, an artist and film programmer for the Berlinale Forum Expanded and the Goethe-Institut, among others. She did a beautiful program called Fiktionsbescheinigungen. Look it up or call me if you forget what it is. It really got some amazing traction. Karina has a PhD from the University of Toronto Cinema Studies Institute for research on Black German cinemas. And I just got to interview Karina about her work during the recent Berlin Film Festival, and you can find that interview on our YouTube channel. Right next to her in a kitchen, as we figured out, is Michael Götting, an author also in Berlin, currently writing his 2nd novel. His first novel, Contrapunctus, received praise at readings from Halifax to Washington, DC. And 8 years ago, Michael was writer in residence at the Munk School of Global Affairs here at the University of Toronto. All roads lead to Toronto. Michael, we've known each other even longer than that. And his recent book recommendation for me, Fernando Pessoa's Book of Disquiet, is now waiting in my considerable reading pile. at home. I'll jump because I want to end with Zun, but I'll go to Noah Anderson, joining us from Berlin. He works as a cultural manager and programmer on topics such as Black empowerment and queer futures. Noah has most recently conceptualized and curated the festival The New Black, and is also part of this year's team of the Republika Festival in Berlin, which I'm dying to come see. A year ago, we danced the night away at Wolfgang Tillmann's exhibition opening at the AGO here in Toronto, and hope we'll get to do that again, right? And of course, last but not least, Zun Lee, our featured artist, is an award-winning visual storyteller, physician, and educator who, Frankfurt-born, divides his time, as we just heard, willing or not, between Canada and the US. Zun and I have worked on this project for a year now, and we likely won't stop because there's so much more to weave with those threads that we've started. So herzlichen Dank to all of you for making the time tonight. And Michael, if you could start us off with a few comments on your Zun Lee image pick, and then share a personal embodied experience of that topic of lingering, loitering, being Black or other in the public space. And then feel free to also just pass the baton on to whoever you want to take next. Remind us what your image was, because we see it here.
Okay. Jutta, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and also to Zun and you, thank you so much for the invitation. Yeah, I chose an image where you see the legs of a woman. I assume it's a woman, and then the upper body of a Black man, which is the image actually that you see. And the photo spoke to me especially, I think, because it's a little bit like what I'm writing about in my novel, so what I'm currently working on. The novel is about a man who finds out that he actually exists 4 times, and then all the others, they find out the same thing. So I'm interested in the different layers of one individual, which is maybe more than one individual. And I saw this in the photo, and I was thinking, okay, there are the legs. It's a real person. It's flesh. I assume it's a woman. And then I also, caught myself assuming it's a white woman because of the way she dressed. I don't know it because she is hidden behind the board. And then you see the upper body of a Black man, but it's the image of a person, which then combined with the legs forms the body of the individual. And then there was the other layer of the way the woman is standing behind the board. I was assuming that she is maybe reading something, maybe she sees something in the back of the board, which then would be another, aspect of this combined personality. So that's what I loved about the photo, because it actually
collective experiences.
Yeah. So that's why I chose it.
Yeah. Do you want to add another, like one of your personal? Do you want to relate it to more of your personal experience? At this point, we'll get around to that. I'm sure you did, in a way, saying that your literary work is related to this.
Yeah.
Just like your multiples. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can make it short here, because this aspect of the different layers of a person, I think it very much shows in a public space, especially when you're Black or, racialized body. Also this idea of like the upper body of this multi-layered individual is an image, is something that there's a lot of imagination involved, I think, in this encounter between Black people and public space.
Yeah. So funny that you think it's a white white woman, but we all have these instincts
that's
or
also
assumptions, right?
imagination. Yeah, yeah.
More imagination.
I imagine this. So yeah, there's also,
Yeah.
part.
And from the way she's standing, I'd probably agree it's a woman.
Yeah. It's also interesting how you add to the things that you see. You make assumptions. They are, part of the imagination. Actually, it's not. I don't know if this is real, but yeah, it's always a part of the personality, and then also the fabric of this encounter that we are having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to pass it on to?
Yeah, I'll just pass it on to Karina.
Making it easy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for starting, Michael, because you opened up so many things to think about, specifically about like the layers of like when we're outside, what kind of layers we put on. That's something I wasn't thinking about until now. And thank you all so much for the invitation, June. Götting and Noah, I'm so happy to share this space with you. Yeah, my image. So I'm going to speak from memory because I don't have it in front of me, which is also probably going to add to imagination. Tell me if it's this, if you see what I see, but I chose an image with two figures who are on a platform, I think waiting for a train or something for travel, and one person is in motion and they're blurry. They're kind of both are very much kind of foregrounded, but to the left, this person is blurry and the other person is still. And this person has their eyes closed, I think, in a kind of, and it was so interesting going through the images. And this one for me was somehow cinematic, just in that it had like movement in it, and it seemed like two different time spaces at once. And I think that's why it spoke to me, just thinking about, for me, especially feeling that I could also sometimes be on a different time plane than others because I'm taking in the space in different ways. Like also what June was saying before about, having to surveil as well in spaces and to strategize your movements and mobility, and that can kind of create maybe a lag or a delay, but not to consider that as something negative. I think it's actually sometimes, if you have time for it, it can be something enjoyable to take a step back and survey. And so that's it was difficult to choose an image, but that one spoke to me in, as I said, like a cinematic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is of course, your lens, right? Your professional lens, your artistic lens. That's really interesting that you chose that in particular. Yeah. Do you want to add, Karina, or do you want to hand it over to Noah or June?
I'm really curious about Noah's picture.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's so great to see you, Karina, and Michael, and Jutta, like we haven't seen us in a while. And yeah, I chose a picture. Let me see if I have it in front of me. It's a picture with those two black muscular bodies standing in front of a barbershop, and equipped somehow with like elements and colors with feminine connotations somehow, like pink, pastel, glitter. The nipples are like glittery, and it's all almost like irritating but also joyful for me and hopeful, because I think this is like an image that I unfortunately almost never see in public spaces, and just on the internet, in illustrated books and photographs. So I was thinking, is this a scenery that is correspond to reality, or is is it just like a fiction, like an expression of imagination for us, somehow like a stage setting? And to put it more into my practice as well, I was like dealing when I curated an event series for the Opera Stuttgart, for the State Opera. I've been dealing with barbershops, somehow how they can be places of like cultural exchange, knowledge production, and private cultural institutions somehow, that like of course don't are not enjoy the benefits of like funding, state funding, unfortunately. So I was like really thinking about like those barber shops, because you can see like the small sign in the, yeah, you can see the sign, right? Everyone, yeah.
Yeah.
So on one hand, those barber shops, like black barber shops, are like places where I can come in contact with other black men, especially like in Germany here. And on the other hand, like those spaces oftentimes make me feel uncomfortable as well, being in those spaces. So it's like really mixed feelings. So I often have like the feeling that I have to hierarchize my identities of being queer and black in those spaces, and have to adapt to a certain stereotypical black man surrounding, and have to like favor the audience that is in the space. So yeah, so that's why I like
Yeah,
those.
thank you for that, for introducing that idea of, yeah, multiple shivers in a way very early on, right? The question of, and Michael also brought that up, imagination, which, you know, it's like reality and fiction. Like you thought this is not actually something that you see on the street when you walk through Neukölln or Wedding in Berlin, right? And then also,
I mean, like everywhere.
Yeah,
I would say like everywhere except of like festives, like
Yeah.
like the Caribbean Carnival, or like pride
Yeah.
parades, but I don't, yeah.
Maybe we'll get to talk a bit more about those specific spaces later on. I think, well, we can fold that in, or maybe June will pick that up now. June, do you wanna, it's always interesting when this guy who takes like hundreds of amazing photos, and I just had the privilege of actually seeing June for the first time take photos, and he was so fast. There's Issy, she was with me. Oh my God, he was just like click, 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 click. I was like, that guy's already taken like 50 photos. And now to task him with choosing one of his own images, which is the one that we see in the top right here. So tell us about that, June.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you, Jutta, Nina, the Goethe-Institut, for hosting the show and for giving me the chance to show work that I actually almost never show, because it's kind of personal. It's not even on our website. So, right, so it's kind of, and you kind of just honed in on it, and I was like, okay, we're gonna, and I was, you know, had to actually get used to people wanting to see this work. But you know, also thanking, you know, this convening, you know, Karina, Michael, Noah, for even this already beginning to be very rich dialectical discourse around identity, how we have to kind of compartmentalize our you know, our blackness in ways that you know, allow us to be legible, illegible, depending on the situation. So I have a lot to say about even just what you just talked about in terms of the images. But before I get to it, I wanted to share the image that I chose, which is actually something that Jutta and I already talked about. It's a black and white image of a building behind a fence. You see a neon sign that reads hours, but it actually is it's defective. The sign should say Bors, but the letters B and S and E are kaput. So so instead of Bors, it says hours. You know, so the building is in Philadelphia. It was the Philadelphia Bors, which was the first commodity exchange in the US, built in the 1800s. And you know, I kind of thought it was kind of an allegory to, you know, who and what is a commodity in the US, who and what is being commodified. And at the same time, the fact that the sign is now, you know, defective and spells hours, to me, that was sort of a way of, it worked both ways, right? Hours as a way to say, okay, can we reclaim, you know, that which is often denied to us, sort of, you know, a space that is ours, a way of being that is ours, but also, you know, the fact that this building, you know, is behind a fence, cannot be accessed by the public. And, you know, the building is now a food hall and is, you know, it has offices, and it's been renovated and, you know, clearly has appreciated again in value, but it could also be read as, you know, sort of, you don't belong here. This is ours. So sort of an allegory on neoliberal access and extraction, who gets, you know, who gets to participate and who gets to be excluded from these kinds of market dynamics. So it's kind of like a lot of different things that played into even just me noticing the sign. So again, Jutta, you mentioned sort of the quickness. So all of the stuff goes through my head very quickly. And I'm sure that's how we all feel when we kind of walk in public, right? Like Michelle, when you said, oh, this woman, she might be white, but all these things are just things that happen very quickly in a fraction of a second, right? So we kind of just surveil our surroundings, and we have to make all these constant decisions. Literally, it's like a tape that runs, right? And so it's not, we can talk about it and it takes minutes to articulate our thoughts, but it happens literally like automatically, right? And just as part of us trying to make it through the day. Yeah, so, you know, I definitely want to talk about what you just said, but you know, I'll maybe pause here and hand it back to Jutta in terms of how you want.
Okay, if you want to pick something up, what just struck me, Zun, as always when we talk, is always something that I hadn't thought about that specifically, and that is the directionality. All of you talked about literally that, of course, all of our viewing comes out of our minds, our heads, our eyes, our feelings, our lived experience, right? You've talked about assumptions, imaginations, the questioning, is this somebody else's reality? It's certainly not my reality. And what you just said, Zun, is that kind of, for me, it was always looking at this image standing in front of this fence. In a way, being on the outside, it also has a code caution sign, right? Do not enter. But it says ours. So I always thought, this is like nearly like a communist manifesto, this image, right? It's like, this is ours.
It kind of is, right? I mean,
right? It kind of is.
Yeah, it's kind of, there's the fence that doesn't allow you to enter, but then,
yeah,
right, the sign encourages you to maybe climb over the fence. I don't know, right?
Exactly, we're going to occupy it, right? And the way you photographed it, or it comes out because it's a nighttime photo, is that it nearly it appears as if this ours sign is sort of hovering over the fence. We know it's on the building at the back, but it is right there. It's right. It seems to be right in front of me. So it could be this like encouraging, this is our space, thinking about spaces, right? Or it could be the other direction that you hinted at. It's the capitalist side of the bourse says, this is ours and you guys are outside of the fence. And of course, all of that has to do with belonging and where we are. And I think that's going to be our main subject, perhaps, for the next half hour. I do really, maybe briefly, we don't want to get too academic, but one thing that all of us, as we sit here and many in the audience share, is that we are, among other things, German language speakers. We are also English language speakers, apparently, and then whatever else we can scrounge up or have in our heritage or, you know, in our worlds. And this whole situation that and this whole exhibition that we find ourselves in really started with Zun and I speaking a year ago about a German word. You brought it up, Zun, and that is verweilen. And it's one of those, my God, there is not one great translation for it. You know, so it isn't fully realized in any of our translation, but it comprises lingering, loitering. Those are the phrases that we have used in communication around the exhibition. It also just means being. For me, it's just being. Kind of, I'm here, right? It maybe has a flavor of resting or hanging out. So how does moving around in language or languages shape your experience, the Black experience, the queer experience? And maybe we'll start again with Michael, just because that is literally his trade, right? Like you work with words, and language, and then Karina works with, you know, cinematic language. We all work with language, but you do write in several languages. But how is this different? How does this make you a different Black person in different languages?
Yeah, I'm thinking. I think I'm very much at home in German, because when I write novels, I'm writing in German, and I especially found out about it that this is actually important for me to write, especially when I write novels, to write them in German. Was when I was in Toronto. I noticed that you know, when I was doing my tours in Canada and in the US, there were many people saying, hey, you should, you know, the work should be at least translated, or you should write in English. And so when the novel came out, though, I think we had been in Toronto for about a month or so. And then when I, you know, was at monk school, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start, you know, with thinking about a new novel, and I'm going to try and write this in English. And but I found, I mean, I can write in English. I had written in English at university and so, but it's not the same as writing a novel in German, because I think, you know, it's just you try to express something which is deeply in the structure also of the society, and which is maybe very deep, you know, in your, you know, your feelings, or the way you are connected to the society, the way you are connected to the world. That's I think what the language does for you. And I figured, yeah, I have to do this. I have to do this in German. You know, my experience with English is rather that if I have to come up with something, like make things more simple or so, because the sentences are shorter, everything is clearer, then I would switch to English and write a few paragraphs in English, like, because it takes me to a, you know, in German, I tend to be more complicated, which, you know, when you look at Nietzsche or Hegel, or I think this is what happened to them. This is what German can do to you. Like, it's super complicated, or you twist stuff and turn it around. And then in English, it's like, that's one sentence, that's the next sentence, that's a paragraph. And that's basically it. And I think that's maybe a reason why English books are shorter when you translate them, or when you translate German books into English, they tend to be shorter.
Is that a I'll have to poke you a bit about then your experience. I mean, you're, you know, German born, and you know, we've had many culture conversations. Does being Black in Germany actually, yes, does it complicate things a bit more than in other places? I mean, we can't pretend that it's the same, because it is not historically the same. It is not literally by the numbers the same as walking around the streets of Detroit or Toronto or somewhere else, right? So do you feel that culture shift particularly in that identity part of you?
Do you mean if it's
Say when you're here.
like in German is complicated in general, or is it more
I don't know.
complicated in Germany?
I was just wondering because of the, you know, the
Yeah.
context is different, right?
Yeah. I think it's more complicated in Germany. Maybe it's also maybe it's also a, you know, a thing of making things more complicated than they actually are. It's, you know, this way that you tend to you want to explain yourself, or you have to explain yourself. You learn this very early. And from my experience in the US, I have family in the US too. They are African Americans. You don't get questioned that much. Even, you know, if they find out, okay, now here's a guy who looks like us and moves like us, and he is family in the US, but he actually has an accent. It was never, you know, I never had to explain much. Like I found out later on, I found out there were people who were thinking I was in the military and stayed in Germany so long that I came back with an accent. But, you know,
Which is not the case.
yeah, maybe a way for them to,
Projections, their projections,
maybe
yeah.
a way for them to, you know, explain this. But it was never complicated because I don't know why. Maybe the thinking is less complicated. Maybe it's complicated in Germany because of the way, the structure of like how is it possible for you to belong to German culture or German society? Yeah.
Well, yeah, for starters, it wasn't originally a rival country. It is now very much, you know, things are changing, but we're all sort of kind of, or at least Michael, Jun and I, the same generation. So that's like, I remember seeing the first black person. I remember that, which tells you that my world was white, of course, in the 80s in Germany, right? And I say that without, you know, evaluating that. It just was, and many places are. Geography, like all of us, that's another thing that we share, is that all of us are not in the place that currently that we were born in. So we are all mobile. We are, and maybe it's also because we are arts workers, or we just are like that as people. So if the others want to chime in, so how geography and mobility play into questions of belonging, or to go abstract from our language question, what Jun also just mentioned, the legibility or illegibility one has in a space. So how does geography or mobility in your lives, Karina, Noah, Jun, play into it in good ways and bad ways? Noah from Cologne, studying in Cologne, now you're in Berlin, you travel, but you're based in Germany very much. Does that even make a difference? I mean, with Jun, it's like the first time, and of course we speak German with each other, he speaks Hessian. For example, yesterday you sent me a text and I was thinking that's a funny word, I've never used that. I forget what it was, like a German word. And it's the regional differences come through. Literally goes to regional language differences. You know, when we meet on that level, you're Hessian and I'm Berliner / Ruhrgebiet. So that's already a difference. But for you, like Noah, in your queerness, in your blackness, you talked about the barbershops. That's a beautiful example, right? But say Cologne, different vibe.
Oh, I haven't lived in Cologne for 7 or 8 years, so it's
It's short
really
time,
hard to
honey.
say.
Short time.
Yeah, I just want to point out that, like, in the majorities of countries on the world, Black people still face racism, police brutality, murder, you know, so I think it's like everywhere still, you know, if you see like the US, if you compare it to Germany, of course, like a certain brutality is not there. But I think what's specific to Germany is that somehow we don't have our own terminology of like an Afro-German terminology. So we are like really focused on the Anglophone territories in terms of like, if we see like the terminology like race, you know, like there's a big discussion in Germany, how can we talk about like race, you know, without using Rasse, without, you know, how can we talk, you know, those kinds of things. Queerness, everyone says queer, okay, it's an English word as well. So I think what's really important is like that, to see if we as Afro-Germans growing up and born in Germany have our own terminology and language. And I think, yeah.
I think that's really key because you know, when I grew up in Germany in the 70s and 80s, it was you know, with respect to space and time, right? It was a certain period of time where, you know, my hometown of Frankfurt was structured in a certain way through the US military occupation. So my experience was always African American, even though I was in Germany, right? And so there was not a sense of being Afro-German or having even access to the epistemologies or, you know, the historiographies. So all that stuff I had to learn in North America, you know, like Audre Lorde and her time in Berlin, and, you know, the history of colonialism that's specific to Germany, you know, because that wasn't accessible to me at that time, right? And then, you know, the soldiers left in the 90s, right? So literally, there's no vestiges of that time left in Frankfurt, right? So either you've experienced it and you have a certain connection to it viscerally and experientially, but there's not much left in terms of, you know, either the soldiers or the infrastructure. So it's hard for Germans to even envision, you know, what was your time like, right? Like, you know, same with the terminology of, you know, conversations around, you know, even like intersectionalität, right? Like all these words that are borrowed from like, you know, like critical race theory and sort of the
Gender.
yeah, and
So
it's on the one hand, it's refreshing to see this conversation in German, but you can tell it's a lot of it is still borrowed from a certain North American cultural context, right? And modified to fit German circumstances. But I think there's a lot of conversation that preceded that in Germany, and I'm very interested in people unpacking, you know, what it specifically meant for otherwise bodies in Germany. You know, for me, it was really difficult to situate myself in North America in terms of, you know, what my Gestalt even means, right? Like, because to be other in Germany in the 70s was very much it was pretty much a total negation, right? Like I didn't even have German citizenship because I had no birthright, right? That only came later. So I was not German by citizenship, right? I had to leave Germany because I couldn't find employment without German citizenship, right? So it was that kind of country, right? So so meaning there was no benefit in trying to assimilate. Like I was other, right? And other meant like, you know, you don't have access to the things that could be beneficial to you in terms of German society. I was literally told after I finished my medical studies, I had to leave Germany because I couldn't find employment, right? So, so there was no possibility for me to imagine myself taking up space or for violence, right, in Germany and what that meant. So my fugitivity was always predicated on like, where else can I be who I am, right? And so, and I wish I had more of a richer conversation that's happening now in Germany then. And I'm kind of interested to say, hey, rather than just sort of importing, you know, critical theories from elsewhere and Germanicizing it, like what are some of the local specificities that we can find that could actually enrich the international conversation, right? So maybe there's a specific way Germans see race belonging, or unbelonging,
Mm.
right? And how might that impact conversations here, right? And so we often kind of tend to center North American ways of seeing and being and theorizing, and kind of and I fall victim to that as well. As I travel to Europe, and I'm always having to readjust, right? So, right, like I'm now very North American centric in my ways of thinking, and I just have to kind of adjust myself, right? And so kind of remember what it was like. And the difficulty for me is that intellectually I think in German, but the language of feeling and the sensual things, that's like English. So right, so
well, it's also your photography, actually. Like that's maybe even another way of
yeah,
speaking.
because I find it hard to you know, like German is very complicated. And when I think in German, my sentences become longer, like Michelle said, right? Like it's like, oh my God, can you put a period somewhere? Like, please. Right, like
We have your essay right there. It is
I know, and I'm still sorry for
German in that
sending that. I'm
sense,
sorry,
you know, of
but it's like
density.
yeah, and then English is a very different way of almost a different modality, right? So for me, the camera gives me a tool to say all that, but not in words, right? So and even how you expressed everything that you saw in the pictures, yes, absolutely, right? And then it's kind of like, how do we even look at a certain place or people or situations or time, and like all that condensed into an image, and you know, things like, oh, you know, this woman, you can't see her, but you assume she was white, right? Like Noah, you said, oh, right, this kind of queer futurity that you see on an everyday basis in these streets, like that's something you can't take for granted, right? Or the complication of having to deal with a black barbershop, right? Yeah, where on the one hand it's a safe space, on the other hand it's also the most violent space you can imagine, right? So, and all these possibilities at the same time, right? Like it's almost like quantum blackness, right? You, everywhere you go, you have to kind of pick Schrodinger's cat, right? So right, where, you know, not all modalities are possible at the same time, and you have to make a choice, and that choice informs how you show up in a place, but also how this place psychogeographically informs you, right? So actually, Karina, to your image, yes, I mean, I chose it because the man in the that's kind of blurred, and the man who's deeply lost in thought, like they almost wear the same clothes. So for me, it almost seemed like they're the same person, right? Like meaning there's an out of body experience, and for me, it resonated because I often feel disembodied in public, right? Like and meaning it takes conscious work for me, emotional labor and otherwise labor, for me to fully embody myself and just say, I'm not going to kind of make myself disappear, right? And so that's how this image came about, right? So it's sort of like, oh, but and so yeah, even just the reason that you picked it, right? Like you know, that's like yeah, all that to say that for me it's always a not so much about like who understands my images, because I want everybody just to have their own story when they look at my work, right? I don't want to presuppose what this means. So I'm always interested in how you see things, right? But when you tell your story about what you see in the images, you know, I always go back to the codification of certain things, right? Like if you share what this means to you, like, you know, and this, like all three of you did that, there's a certain code that unfolds where like that resonates with me, right? Like, you know, so no, when you say, oh, like, can queer people show up like this? Where, how? Right, but also we don't really see this. So there's a lot of the unspoken things where in Germany I would use like a whole paragraph, and in English it would just be just be right, and then the eye roll and the head bobble. So right, so and then you understanding what the means, right? So so in that sort of nonverbal exchange, I think there's a lot that even unfolds in terms of how we show up, right? Like I actually, sorry, I don't want to hog this conversation like that, but to your point, Jutta, something I noticed, Toronto versus other places, right? So when I'm in Detroit and I notice another Black person coming towards me, like I nod, and that nod is often, right, like it's reciprocated.
Yeah.
In Toronto, I rarely do because it often doesn't get reciprocated, and in Germany, I never do it, right? So because it's a very specific, hyper-specific thing. So it's also same way I take pictures, right? So sometimes the camera or the picture I take is a nod, and sometimes it's not, right? So it's also that kind of thing where depending on the location, I pick a different manifestation of you know, how I show up, because safety, because policing, surveillance, because legibility. So it's all these things combined, right? So yeah. Anyways,
Knowing the codes,
knowing the code, and sometimes
the code at the place.
yeah, and sometimes I don't know the code, and then I'm like have to kind of figure it out.
So we've talked not enough. I could do this for another couple of hours, but we've talked about a bit about, at the end of the day, seeing and reading images, right? It all comes back to that, and reading and seeing space. We all do every day as soon as we leave the house, probably when we get out of bed, with like a myriad of parameters. I wanted to make sure, we have about 10 minutes, I think, left, that we do get to a point of, you know, a bit of sort of foresight, blue sky thinking, and also agency. So how do you want your space, the space you want to be in, that you want to belong to, how do you want it to present itself, to be shaped, to be activated, to offer belonging, and how do you register, how do you build a personal relationship with a good space, a comfortable space, home, belonging, whatever you are looking for. I don't know, you might be looking for other things that I'm looking for, right, in the public space. What is how do you build your world?
I mean, I'm really thankful, Zun and Noah and Michael, for everything you've brought together in this conversation, and Noah, especially this idea of a common language, and I think, Zun, that's also, you know, something you're thinking through with this codification, and how you say your practice of loitering through photography is participatory, right? Yeah. So you're also about building this language, a kind of like patois, also with this space that everybody in Toronto is in, that's growing as we speak with more photographs. So I think it's really exciting, this thought. So my space definitely would include this kind of space for a new language to be developed. I mean, I lived in Germany for a long time, and people know me as somebody who's always fighting to speak German. I really love the German language, and I'm also always fighting to use it simply and not in a complicated way. And I think that there's something interesting about a resistance to German that's accented, or German that is maybe simple or playful, or dialected. And I would hope that my space would include that, because I think we need to create like a German patois. We need a German Creole. We need to find a way to speak together in codified ways. And you know, in my research, looking at Black German films, I'm thinking about like, how can we see and feel that in a cinematic language? You know, are there certain sort of techniques that are being used to express different affective, you know, realities? But yeah, definitely, language is definitely a part of this space, this kind of speculative space that you're talking about. But I would also say, maybe as I pass on to Michael to answer this question, I'm moving like away from belonging, in the way that it's being used. Again, we talked about like how words are used and then changed, and in German we also are using belonging, you know, with a little bit of a, you hang on that G on the end, you know. But for me, it's like, I'm almost thinking, is it more about respect? Especially June, when you speak about like that, from birth, you were never, there was no possibility for belonging, like in terms of like, structurally, right? If you say that, you know, I mean, this is always such a strange conundrum as a Canadian, this idea of being born somewhere but not getting the citizenship. It took me a while to wrap my head around that in Germany. This really idea of, okay, you have to really, they have different sort of qualifications for that. But yeah, that is it about respect? Is that maybe something that has to be established first? Yeah.
Wow, that was a roundhouse kick. I made a million notes. But do you guys want to add to that, Noah, Michael, and June again, of course, on how will you build your space? What do you want from your spaces? Shared languages, citizenship, respect.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I did my master dissertation in London about safer cultural spaces for queer Black men. So I was looking at spaces from organizers, from cultural organizers, from practitioners, from people who enjoy those spaces, what those kinds of spaces need in terms of queer Black men to feel comfortable in them. And I think for me, it's like a community aspect, those spaces. It has to be like reciprocal somehow, like it has to be mutually designed and changed and yeah, something like that. And also like allyship, because it's where most of the money is in some aspects. And also to share resources. You know, like everyone comes with their like privileges somehow, and like how can we share those things we got?
So do you want to add to that or synthesize or round up?
Sure, and I'd also like to hear from Michael. But I'm struggling with, you know, and you kind of went into this rabbit hole with belonging because this word has now been co-opted by the DIA Nazis, right? So what is belonging, right? It's something that can be instituted. I'm like, well, but I think for me it's love, simply love, right? Like love, and which is capacious enough to include everything that you've already said, you know, in terms of and just to give you an example with respect to this conversation today, right? And it's not really about my street photography, but more so the ethnographic work I do, where you know, I take my camera and go into certain communities for years and kind of just bury myself in that community, right? And the question I always get is, how did you get in there? Which is already like the wrong question for me, right? I'm like, I didn't get in there, like I was already in there. So, right, like meaning I would never, like, I'm naturally very painfully shy and introverted. Like I would never go somewhere where like like I don't like to connect with people. I'm perfectly happy by myself. But but I, you know, in terms of I go where the love is, very simply, right? Like and that was actually what all my mentors also said, go where the love is, right? So and on the other hand, if you don't feel the love, you don't need to be here, right? So meaning like there's always the struggle to say insert yourself into spaces where you want to be seen. I'm like, why? Right? Like find the spaces where your entire authentic whole being is already seen and welcomed and like invited, and right, like where all these things around mutual aid and sharing and allyship are already there, right? So and then you can use that as a basis to build from there, right? So I specifically just go into these communities where I already know that I'm being welcomed, And so I don't have to answer the question of like, how did you manage to get these people to accept you? I'm like, I didn't have to do anything, right? So so it's that, right? It's and the work is then in this, I would say the word is discernment. Know where you are being loved and know where you're not being loved, right? So and developing the capacity to not chase after people who don't love you, right? So
that's an interesting point, right? Because some people will argue that the fight, like you need to change spaces, you need to go into spaces and make them another thing and adapt them to your wishes, your reality. But you're saying, yeah, maybe that's not your way. Maybe it's somebody else's way, but it's not your way. I find that super.
Yeah, I think
without weighing it.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
For me, you can change spaces. By not having to resist all the time, right? Meaning,
or being in the room but not struggling against it the whole time.
Because at some point there has to be an enoughness where you just living your life, you living your best life even is enough, right? Like, because that's what privilege means, right? That you can show up anywhere in the world and it's enough. Like, you don't have to answer to nobody or justify your existence or explain yourself, right? Like the expectation that you will be catered to and welcomed is a privilege, and some have it and others don't, right? So but even this entitlement that you can go anywhere in the world and expect to be welcomed, or that space will be opened for you, right? Like and so for me, I'm just saying, well, if that's a privilege, then I'm gonna disavow that and say, I'm gonna just show up as me, and that's enough, right? And then just the work of doing that, rather than having to just fit in like an a-hole, is like, and just by example doing that, and then hopefully finding the spaces where that's already a reality, and that's just expanding the spaces, right? Like for me, that's already hard work, right? Like I don't and again, that's maybe my age, right? So maybe if I was like 25, I would think differently, but when you're not 25, right, it's like I just want to focus on building with the people that I love, like a loving, beautiful, capacious space where I'm at, and expanding that space from within, right? Rather than going somewhere where I know I'm not being welcomed and tearing down a monument. Like, I'm like, let them have their monuments. Like, it's not, I don't care, right? Like maybe we even need those monuments to remind ourselves how bad these structures are, right? Like so
reality is sad.
But like all this work of like focusing on what hurts us prevents us from building the spaces that love us, right? So, and I don't have enough time in the day to do both, right? Maybe some do. I don't. So.
And you're a doctor, so we'll. That was a great quote. I'll have to remember that. Yeah, about the it's the glass half full or glass half empty a bit too, or how much agency do you want to grab?
Or get a bigger glass, right? So
get a bigger glass, or get a different glass, or we could be talking for hours, but basically our hour is up.
Oh.
Yes, unless we really sort of kind of have to switch over. As we were prepping this conversation, we had the crazy idea. Wouldn't that be interesting if we had a conversation in German at some point, a public one? We could do that. Maybe we can translate. And then we can talk about other phrases like Heimat, right? When we talk about home and belonging. I haven't even started to talk about this other untranslatable word. I'm just going to, it's beautiful, Zun, that you ended in a way with a very simple but worthwhile, of course, appeal to love. And that reminded me of your essay and the three quotes that you have fronting the essay that you wrote for us. And one is by the American poet Ross Gay. And I've thought about this sentence a lot. He says, "It occurs to me that laughter and loitering are kissing cousins, as both bespeak an interruption of production and consumption in the public space. So basically, you know, laughter, and I interpret this here, are related to your idea of love as a, in a way, a positive intervention, but one that doesn't have to do with struggle and fight always. You know, it doesn't sort of make things great all the time, but it is also a Haltung, right? It's a position that you refer to in your essay, and I encourage all of you to grab the essay, to read up. We also got, I think, a really great article in Spacing magazine, right? June and I spent a couple hours with the journalists there, the Public Space magazine, speaking about a lot of these concepts. I want to encourage you to look out for Noah Anderson's work. We need to get you back to Toronto and do some projects. Obviously, Michael's next novel. Have to do a reading at the Goethe-Toronto. We'll say it right now, right, Nina? And Karina, I'm pretty certain sooner or later we'll see your curations and the commissions that you hopefully get, and your really smart approach to cinematic language. And it was amazing to see all of you bringing your sort of your personal worlds and your professional worlds very much into this conversation. So thank you so much. Again, wish we had much more time to dig much deeper, but so much in there to take home, and we'll continue the conversation in the realm of this project. Will actually please stay, as we're about to break out the popcorn. Sorry guys, you'll have to get your own, although you're going to bed now, I guess. Maybe you're going out dancing. I'm looking at Noah in Berlin. You're going to...
I wish, Jutta.
You're going straight to Bergheim from here, right? It's like, what, just midnight. And we'll switch over to show We Almost Lost Bochum. It's a really lovely and wild and interesting documentary, because it is set, well, it refers back to the 90s and German rap and hip hop. Yes, that's a thing. And it was a very sort of interracial thing at the time. And then, you know, maybe it went away a bit before it came back. But so we're looking at many of the topics that we talked about through the lens of music. And we'll do so again at the finissage. I can tease that much, right, June? That for the closing event of this show on the 29th, June and I will be back here in the space, hopefully with you. And we'll talk way more about the 3 accompanying soundtracks that June has created for this show, that create very different vibes on different days that you come in here. We will say goodbye to you guys. I'm trying to drag it out so that I don't have to do that. Thank you so much. Dankeschön nach Berlin. And we will see each other very soon. Thank you for contributing. Soon I'll see you next week. And we will now again darken this space and watch the movie. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you all. Really a pleasure.
Take care.